and I'll chant it in Sanskrit and then give an English translation, and then we will get into the text. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitam Ritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Amba Tvam Anusandadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Vasudeva Sutan Devam Kamsa Chanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langhayate Girim Yatkripa Tamaham Vande Paramananda Madhavam. Om, O Mother Bhagavad Gita, I meditate on you who were made known to Partha by the Lord Narayana himself. You who were included in the Mahabharata by the ancient sage Vyasa. You the goddess who rains down the nectar of non-dualism in 18 chapters, the destroyer of relative existence. I worship Krishna, the world teacher, the son of Vasudeva, the supreme delight of Devaki, his mother, and the slayer of the demons, Kamsa and Chanur. I adore that supremely blissful Madhava, by whose grace the mute are made eloquent, and the lame are enabled to walk over mountains. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat. Om peace, peace, peace be unto us all. So last time we began again at the beginning of chapter 2. We didn't go back to chapter 1, but we began again at chapter 2, verse 1, because it had been so long since we had had a Gita class. And though we were actually to begin chapter 2, verse 40, or actually beyond verse 40, it was around verse 55, I think, the Stita Prajna Lakshanas, the qualities of a man of steady wisdom. I decided to start again at chapter 2. So last time we did verses 1 through 10 of chapter 2, and today we will start at verse 11. So verse 11 is important because that's where Sri Krishna's actual teaching to Arjuna begins. He speaks earlier. In chapter 1, he speaks just to tell Arjuna that he's taking him to the middle of the field. So now you can see these soldiers who are arrayed against you. And in the beginning of chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, he speaks 2 verses, which actually Swami Vivekananda said that the spirit of the Gita is contained in those 2 verses, verses 2 and 3 of chapter 2. I won't go back over them now, but in chapter 1, we saw the setup for the teaching of the Gita, where Arjuna is facing the Kauravas and other people who were allies of the Kauravas, and his own army, and all of the Pandavas' allies as well. And when he realized that he was fighting with his kinsmen, he came undone. And so by the end of chapter 1, he throws away his bow and arrow. He collapses in the chariot. Again, in those days, chariots didn't have seats. It's not like the chariots in the Indian calendars you see nowadays, picturing the Gita. As Swami Vivekananda said, it was like the old Roman chariot, where you stood in the chariot, there was no place to sit. But he collapsed to the floor of the chariot, to the base of the chariot, and said, I won't fight. No yotsya, I won't fight. So then Krishna, at the beginning of chapter 2, he tells them to give up this weak faint-heartedness, this unmanliness, that is anarya jushtam. It's not worthy of an arya, of a noble person like you. And then Arjuna again gives excuses for why he can't fight, because even if he were to defeat the others in battle, then all of the enjoyments that he would have in victory would be stained with the blood of his kinsmen and his teachers. So he says, no yotsie, I won't fight. And then became quiet. Then Sanjaya in verses 9 and 10 of chapter 2, he says that Sri Krishna had a smile on his face as he began to address Arjuna. Prahasan iva Bharata. O Bharata, O King Dhritarashtra, who also was of the Bharata clan and known as Bharata. O Bharata, Sri Krishna as though smiling. That is, smiling at what he realized was the delusion of Arjuna. As I explained last time, not smiling in a mean way, not smiling like one of us might do when we delight in someone else's misery that we have caused because we want to hurt them. No, not like that. He smiles because he sees Arjuna's delusion and sees that there is no need for it, and that he is about to destroy that illusion. So then he begins verse 11, where we are today, and that begins, Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Ashochanan Vashochastvam Prajnavadamscha Bhashase Gataso Nagatasunscha Nanushocanti Panditaha. So this says, Ashochanan Vashochastvam. You are mourning those who should not be mourned for. You're expressing sorrow for those who should not be grieved for. Prajnavadamscha bhashase, and yet you speak words of wisdom. So he's saying, oh Arjuna, you're speaking words of wisdom. As I explained last time, when we go through chapter 1 and the first verses of chapter 2, up to the point where we are now, we see that Arjuna's arguments are very good. They're not stupid arguments. They're not the arguments of a fool. He's making very good arguments that many wise people might make. But he's not wise enough. And so that is why Sri Krishna is smiling, and why he says, you speak words of wisdom. Yes, he's not saying that you're speaking like an idiot. He's not saying that those are the words of a fool. You're smarter than that, Arjuna. No, he says, Prajnavadamscha bhashase. You're speaking words of wisdom, but you're grieving for those who should not be grieved for. Gatasun agatasunscha nanu shochanti panditaha. The pandits, and here pandit doesn't mean somebody who studies books all day. It means one who has real wisdom, spiritual insight, who is a spiritually awakened person. Wise ones grieve neither for those who have passed away nor for those who have not yet passed away. Gatasun, agatasun. For gatasun, those who have already passed away, or agatasun, those who have not yet passed away. The wise don't grieve after either. So we don't yet know why. Of course, most of us have read the Gita, so we do know why. But if we were Arjuna, and as I've said many times, reading the Gita, we have to put ourselves in the position of Arjuna. Would that we could put ourselves in the position of Krishna, but we can't do that yet. But we can put ourselves in the position of Arjuna, because Sri Krishna is teaching the Gita to us through Arjuna. Arjuna is our murti. He is our embodiment. He is our representative. And so through Arjuna, Sri Krishna is speaking to us because we also grieve. We grieve for those who pass away. But he says that the wise grieve neither for the departed nor for those who are not yet departed. Now let me stop on that and say that feeling sorrow in the death of someone, that is natural. So the idea here is not that you won't feel sorrow when someone that you love passes away. Only a hard-hearted person or a stone would not feel sorrow for the passing away of a loved one. But the wise know that I'm grieving for myself because I have lost someone that I love and whose company I will not have anymore. I'm not grieving for the person, because for those who have passed away, there's nothing to grieve for. They wake from this dream of life into another world. If they're spiritually high enough, they go to either to illumination, or they go to a high realm where they spend a long time in a meditative-like state before they come back, in the company of great sages. If they're not that high, then they go to a relative heaven and spend some time there before they come back. But it's like waking up from sleep. When you wake up from sleep, you're in this world, whereas before you were in the dream world. And so there's nothing to grieve over for the sake of the person who passed away. We have a child who passes away. Naturally, the heart of a parent, the heart of a sibling, the heart of a friend of the family is going to be distraught with the death of a child. But there's no need to grieve for the child. People say, oh, he or she was not able to realize all of their dreams. They'll never get to go to high school. They'll never get high school graduation. They won't have the joy of going to college and getting a degree. They won't have the joy of having a wife. No, that's all nonsense. That's nonsense. The person who has passed away, there's nothing to grieve for, because they go on to a new life. It's grieving is only for us, because we miss their company. We won't get to see them in high school graduation. We won't get to see them at college graduation. For them, to grieve is stupidity. There's no excuse for it, to grieve for them. The grieving is for us who have been left behind. And so Sri Krishna starts by telling Arjuna that you are grieving for those who should not be grieved over. The wise don't grieve for the departed, nor for those who have not yet departed. And then he goes on to verse 12. And verse 12, he says, Natuvaham jatu nasam natvam neme janadhipaha nachaiva na bhavishyama sarve vayamata param. So here he says that natu eva aham jatu na asam. It's not that I didn't exist before. Natvam na ime janadhipa, nor you nor these kings of the earth. So it's not that there was a time when I didn't exist, or that you didn't exist, or these other kings that are here allied with us or allied with Duryodhan, that we didn't exist. No, we've always existed. Nachaiva na bhavishyama, nor is it that we will not exist in the future. So there was never a time when we didn't exist, nor is it possible that we will come to not exist in the future. Sarve vayamata param. Certainly it is, the running translation is, but certainly it is not a fact that I did not exist at any time, nor you, nor these rulers of men. And surely it is not that we all shall cease to exist after this. Atah param, sarve, all of us, sarve vayam, all of us, atah param, after this. So the idea here is that our existence is eternal in both directions. The idea in Christianity is that God created us, each of us, and put us here for one lifetime. Before this lifetime, we didn't exist. God made us, and when we were conceived and born, and then when we die, we have eternal life either in heaven or in hell. But we're eternal going forward, but backward we started when this life began. But Vedanta says that that's impossible. That's irrational, philosophically impossible, and it's experientially contradicted by experience. That which exists forever has to exist outside of time. There's no beginning, there's no end to it. It always is. And so there was not a time when we didn't exist before this birth, nor will there be a time when we cease to exist. We are eternal. So why is Sri Krishna teaching this to Arjuna? In fact, from here forward, for most of chapter 2, he's teaching the path of knowledge, jnana yoga. Later, he teaches bhakti, he teaches karma. Chapters 3, 4, 5 are largely about karma. Chapter 6 is about Raja Yoga, meditation. Chapters 7 through 12 are largely about devotion. But here he starts with the path of knowledge. Why? For the same reason that Swami Vivekananda taught unceasingly the path of knowledge. Yes, Swami Vivekananda, like Krishna, he taught bhakti, he taught karma, he taught Raja Yoga, but all founded on knowledge, the knowledge of the self, that I am the divine self, I am eternal, I have no birth, I have no death. Why? Arjuna needed that, and Sri Krishna taught it first to Arjuna, because he was in a incredibly threatening situation where he's on the battlefield, he's facing his enemies, he's either going to kill or be killed. And so the intensity of this situation, just imagine, you're on the battlefield, you're going to be killed or you're going to kill. There are no other choices, kill or be killed. So in that situation, Arjuna needed the source of the greatest strength, because seeing his kinsmen and his gurus on the battlefield on the opposing side, he had come completely undone. He had, as we say in modern slang, he had a meltdown and was completely undone and fell to the floor of the chariot, incapable of fighting. So he needs an injection of the highest strength, and that strength comes from the knowledge of the divine self. That within me is all power, within me is all knowledge, within me is all blessedness. I have no death, I have no birth. And others also are birthless and deathless, the birthless and deathless self. And so because of this, there is no reason to grieve. The previous verse, Sri Krishna says, Ashochanan vashochastvam, that you are grieving for those who should not be grieved for. Why should they not be grieved for? Because the self is eternal. There's no birth, there's no death for the self, only the appearance of birth and the appearance of death. Why is it that someone appears to die to us? Because we have identified them and they have identified themselves with the body. And so when the body goes, we think, oh, they're gone, they're gone. They've passed away, they're dead. No, 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 no. If any of you have ever had the chance to see a person die, or you have come to a person just after they have passed away, someone that you know, it's a remarkable experience, because you see that 1 minute the person is living, even if they're failing and they're beginning to shut down and you know that they're dying, but still the person is there. Even if you can no longer communicate with them, the person is there. And then when the moment of death comes, there's nobody there. There's a body. There's just a body. And it's a striking difference between just a body and the living presence of a person. And so that which is the real person, that which makes the body seem alive, that doesn't die. It leaves the body, but it doesn't leave. The body falls away from it. And so again, it says, but certainly it is not a fact that I did not exist at any time, nor you, nor these rulers of men. And surely it is not that we shall cease to exist after this. Little children, they often ask their parents, where was I before I was born? Because a child can't imagine not existing. How can a child imagine not existing? So it wants to know, where was I before I was born? And so mother perhaps says, well, you were in my tummy. But before that, where was I? And most have no answer for that. But that's because the child can't imagine not existing. And if a little child experiences the death of a relative, a grandparent, or someone passes away, someone that they knew, they want to know, where did granddad go? Where's granddad now? They can't imagine. And that's because, not because of the ignorance of a child, it's because of the wisdom of a child. Because the child knows that I must have been somewhere before I came here, and granddad must be somewhere now that he's no longer in that body. He must be somewhere. Where did my dog passed away? Where did my dog go? I remember children asking that. Where is my dog now? And parents trying to come up with some sort of answer. Well, there's a doggy heaven, and your dog is in doggy heaven. Something to satisfy the child. But yes, that's because we are eternal. And so Sri Krishna is giving the essence of the path of knowledge as Swami Vivekananda did. Sri Ramakrishna used to teach mainly devotion. If you read the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, however, you begin to see that laced through all of his devotional teachings, his emphasis was always on devotion in the Gospel, but laced through all of it is the highest knowledge, the knowledge of non-dualism. And Swami Vivekananda felt, and he wasn't teaching contrary to Sri Ramakrishna, it was Sri Ramakrishna himself who had taught him what to teach the world. In long private conversations before Sri Ramakrishna passed away, other direct disciples said Sri Ramakrishna would pull Narayan aside and teach him what it was that his message to the world. And so Swamiji, he taught the path of knowledge because he saw that the present world was going to be full of difficulties for people. The coming world was going to be filled with difficulties as we transition from one yuga to another yuga. I don't mean that in the technical terms of the Puranas, but in a general term of one age to another age. Swami Vivekananda said that with the coming of Sri Ramakrishna, we'd come to the beginning of the Satya Yuga. But for the Satya Yuga to manifest, the Kali Yuga has to be destroyed. And so Swamiji saw that there would be a lot of destruction before a new configuration of the world could come about, a new configuration ushered in by Sri Ramakrishna. And so people have to be strong. People have to be strong. We have to learn to stand on the self, to be fearless in the face of the difficulties of life. Now we're having the pandemic, and we have to face it. We can't run from it. We have to face it. We're having an economic meltdown. How bad it will be, we don't know. Just a day or two ago, good employment numbers came out, but experts say that those good numbers hide bad things, that the employment numbers don't reveal the real situation. So the economy is going south. The pandemic has changed our social conditions, and we don't know what is going to happen. But we have to be ready to face anything. If the economy revives, well and good. If it doesn't, that we have to face. Face it with strength. Face it standing on the nature of the self. If the pandemic continues, that we have to face. We have to deal with it. And for that, we need to know the eternality of the self. That for me, there is no birth. For me, there's no death. For those that I love, there is no birth and there is no death. So then we come to verse 13, which says, Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yovanam jara tatha dehandara praptir dhiras tatra namuhyati. So Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yovanam jara, as for an embodied person, one of us who is embodied, as for an embodied person, the death experiences, the body experiences youth, maturity, and old age. Tatha dehandara praptir dhiras tatra namuhyati. So it is with the attainment of another body after death. The wise are not deluded by this. So in this body, we have youth, we have maturity, we come to adulthood. Then we have old age. If we live long enough, we have old age. The alternative is to die young. So if we live long enough, we become old. And so after the death of this body, we get another body. So the wise are not perturbed by this. The running translation is, as our boyhood, youth, and decrepitude to an embodied being in this present body, similar is the acquisition of another body. That being so, an enlightened person does not get deluded. So yes, we don't think when I go from childhood into young adulthood, I don't think that, oh, that child is dead now, and I go and weep and moan because the child is dead. No, the child has just grown up. And so when we leave this body and attain to another body, there's nothing to grieve over. It's part of a natural process. There's nothing in the world so natural as death. Everyone in the history of the world and the prehistory of the world, everyone without exception has passed away, except for those that are still living right now. Millions and billions of people have passed away. And all of those of us who are alive now, one day every single one of us will die. There's no doubt about that. And so we have to get used to that idea. The spiritual person should become familiar with the fact of death. The fact that I am going to die, that should not be something that catches me unawares, something that surprises me. I read some months ago, I forget who it was that said it. I wish I could remember, and I don't remember the exact quote, but it was the phrasing of it, it was by a writer, and the phrasing of it was very good. But the idea was that there's nothing that comes as such a surprise to a man as growing old. And that's true. I know from my own experience. When suddenly one day we wake up and we start having aches and pains, we suddenly find that I can't do things that I used to do. I can't move in ways that I used to move. It's a tremendous shock. So if you ask any of us, before we became old, are you going to become old? We would say, yes, of course I'm going to become old. Everybody becomes old. So we know it intellectually. But when it actually happens, we're so surprised. Many people joke about the fact, but it's a joke based on reality, that one day we look in the mirror and we think, who is this old man looking back at me? Who is this old man looking at me? And so we have to become familiar with the fact of death also, as we become familiar with the fact of old age. We have to familiarize ourselves with the fact that death is going to come. That doesn't mean living a morbid life where all we think about is dying. And it certainly doesn't mean fearing death, but it means that we have to come to the realization that, yes, it's going to happen. What's the benefit of that? Excuse me. The benefit is that if I realize that I'm going to die, then the mind accepts it, and it's no longer a fear on the horizon of my mind. Until we've accepted the fact, it's always something which is looming like a dark cloud on the horizon. We may try to forget it. We may try not to look at the horizon, just to keep our eyes fixed on the immediate things of life. That's what most people do in life. They're afraid of what's coming down the road. And so they blind themselves to that and just keep themselves involved in the immediate facts of life, the immediate engagements of life. No, accept the fact that we're going to die. Accept it. It's going to happen. Ignoring it is not going to make it go away. I once saw an article in the Sunday supplement to a newspaper, the magazine section. They had, it was interviews with people in a retirement home. And the headline of the article was, "We don't talk about that here." And so one of the members of the retirement community, when this interviewer asked about death, do people, how do people here deal with death, or do you discuss it or anything? And he said, "We don't talk about that here." So yes, it doesn't mean that that should be your regular topic of conversation, but we do have to accept it. So that's what this verse 13 is about. So then we come to 14. Excuse me. It's not COVID-19, don't worry. It's allergies from pollen. I have two things to try to fight it. One is ginger and honey, and then just warm water. So verse 14 says, Matras parshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkaraha agamapaino nityas tanstitikshasva bharata. So this says, Matras parshastu kaunteya shitoshna sukha dukkaraha. That the contact of the senses with, of the sense organs with objects brings happiness and misery. It's just contact with the objects of the world through the senses that we experience misery. That which we see, that which we hear, that which we touch, that which we smell, that which we taste. It's through these organs, their contact with the objects of the world, that we experience heat and cold, happiness and misery. Shitoshna sukha dukkha. They give heat and cold, happiness and misery. So heat and cold here stand for all of the pairs of opposites. And happiness and misery stand for pain and pleasure, happiness and misery, elation and depression, etc. So one stands for the pairs of opposites of in the experience, and the other the pairs of opposites in our mental reactions. So agamapaino nityas tanstitikshasva bharata. They're only temporary. They come and they go. So learn to bear them, O Arjuna. So here he's talking about sahishnuta or titiksha, that is forbearance, the ability to forbear the experiences of life. That the contact of the senses brings the experience of heat and cold and other pairs of opposites, and it brings happiness and suffering and other pairs of mental reactions. But these contacts of the senses with the outer world are temporary. So learn to bear them, O Arjuna, knowing that they're temporary, knowing that this too shall pass, as the saying goes, this too shall pass. When in the midst of misery, always remember, this too shall pass. When in the midst of suffering, remember, this too shall pass. And even when in the midst of great happiness, remember that this too shall pass. Don't get carried away by misery. Don't get carried away by happiness. Now that sounds negative. We can understand not being carried away by misery, trying to not get carried away by misery, difficult though it might be. But why not be carried away by happiness? We all want to be happy. So if I can be happy, if I can be ebullient, if I can rejoice, then why not jump with joy when there's a possibility? It's because if we take one, we have to take the other. But there is a superior state. There's a state of mind which is far higher, far better than even emotional elation, even emotional rejoicing. Because within elation and rejoicing, there is a nervous excitement, element of nervous excitement, and the fear that it's going to end, or the knowledge that it's going to end. But there is a far superior state, which is neither elation nor depression, but which is an equanimity, which is true joy, which is quiet joy, which is joy without reaction, like a flame without smoke, a smokeless flame, smoke being the reaction to the fire. But this is like a smokeless flame, a reactionless joy. And so, but the contacts of the organs with objects are producers of happiness and sorrow through cold and heat to that internal organ, to the mind, which has a beginning and an end. The mind has a beginning and an end. They are transient. Bear them, O descendant of Bharata. Now, I'm reading the translation which is in the commentary of Madhusudana Saraswati. And I prefer, actually, I was thinking today that I should, for this class, I should use a different translation, because I can give my own, but then I need to read a running translation just to give a smooth English meaning besides the part-by-part Sanskrit translation. So I need to have a translation handy in order to give a smooth running translation. but I'm going to move from this Madhusudana's commentary to another text, maybe Swami Vireshwaranandaji's Gita or Tapasyanandaji, both of which are very good, because Madhusudana was a great scholar and a great saint, and his commentary is wonderful, but because he was a great scholar as well as great saint, his translations are often complicated. And this is a good example of it. The straightforward meaning is not so difficult. It doesn't say anything about to the internal organ, which has a beginning and an end. No, it gives the idea that the contact of the senses with the external world come and they go. And there are other complications in the translation here too. So next time I will use a different translation for the running translation. But again, the meaning is clear, that the experiences of the senses, they come and they go, and we have to learn to bear with them. Why bear them? Because we have no choice. Even to lead an ordinary life, to lead a good ordinary life, we have to forbear. We can't have any happiness in this world unless we have forbearance. You find a person who has no forbearance insufferable. You can't be around them because they're getting upset by everything. Everything that happens upsets them. We can't live like that. If you want to be happy, you have to learn to bear with the ups and downs of life. You have to learn to keep your mind in a balanced state, which is not disturbed by the ups and downs of life. Otherwise, life is absolutely intolerable. And you make it intolerable for others also. The people who, when they, I've known people who, when they go into a restaurant, the first thing they do is start remaking the restaurant. They tell the waiters, oh, can you turn the music down, or can you turn the music up, or can you change it to some other music? I don't like that type of music. Can you turn the air conditioning up? Can you turn the air conditioning down? Can you move our table this way on the menu? I don't like this, so can you leave that out? Can you put this in? Can you do it this way? Can you do it that way? Everything has to be made exactly to order because they can't bear anything except for exactly what they want for their own comfort. No, you can't be happy that way, and you make others miserable also. So learn to bear and forbear. Learn to bear and forbear. And the more power of bearing and forbearing we have in life, the happier we'll be. So the result of learning forbearance is happiness. Not learning to forbear means that you're going to be miserable all the time because you're not you're not correcting situations to make them comfortable for yourself. No, you learn to be happy in every circumstance. So let's see, we'll take at least one more verse. Verse 15 says, Yam hina vyatayantyete purusham purusharshabha samadukha sukham dhiram somritatvaya kalpate. So this says that yam hina vyatayantyete purusham purusharshabha. Oh, Purusharshabha, that's an epithet for Arjuna, which means bull of the bull among men. Purusharshabha, bull among men. One of the wonderful things in Madhusudana's commentary is that whenever Sri Krishna calls Arjuna by an epithet, or Arjuna addresses Sri Krishna with one of his names or nicknames, Madhusudana finds why that particular epithet was appropriate. And so here, Sri Krishna is addressing Arjuna as bull among men, Purusharshabha. Why? Because he had come undone. He had lost his bravery. He had lost his poise of mind. And so he's reminding him that you are a bull among men. And there you are lying or sitting in the floor, slumped over in the floor of the chariot with your bow and arrow thrown away. You, a bull among men. No, so he addresses him as, O bull among men. One who is not, the person who is not disturbed by these, the pairs of opposites, sukha dukkha, shitoshna, heat and cold, happiness and misery, samadukha sukham dhiram, who is steady in the midst of happiness and misery. So amritatvaya kalpate, such a one is fit for immortality. So the person who learns to forbear the pairs of opposites, who can maintain equanimity in the midst of the pairs of opposites, such a one is fit for immortality. So that's why he is telling Arjuna that he must learn to do. He must learn to bear and forbear. As we know, both Sri Ramakrishna and the Holy Mother used to say that in the Bengali alphabet there are three shas. Sha, sha, sha. All of them say sha, which means to forbear. Of course, in all of the Sanskritic languages of India, there are the three shas, Dantya sha, Murdanya, and Talavya sha. But in Bengali, all three are pronounced the same. And so that's why this works only for Bengalis. It doesn't work for people in other parts of India. But in the Bengali alphabet, there are three shas, sibilants, and all of them say the same, sha, 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 which means forbear, forbear, forbear. And Holy Mother used to also say, she would say that, and she would also say that he who forbears endures. He who forbears endures. And so that is what Sri Krishna is saying. Learn to bear the pairs of opposites. So let's see, we'll take one more verse. Let me stop here because the next verse, there are about 5 verses, 16 through 20, yes. 5 verses, 6, 7, actually 8 or 9 verses that all stem from verse number 16. And so let me save that for next time so that we can take 16 and the other verses that all go together. About, again, the same idea, but they all form a consistent theme of the eternity of existence. Nasato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satha. That which exists never ceases to exist, and that which doesn't exist never comes into existence. But that will take a good bit of explanation. And then it's tied to the coming verses. So we'll stop here, but let me see if there are any questions. So Shonak, I don't know how to handle the questions if people have them.
I have one question.
Good. Please go ahead, Partha.
Thank you, Maharaj, for this wonderful talk.
Yeah.
Today's talk was, I really liked it. I mean, really
Good.
liked the talk. Okay, the first sloka that you had said, 11,
Yes.
you took long time to explain
Yes.
because I had questions because I have not seen any person here in my life that who is not worried about death and also doesn't grieve about if somebody dies, and especially if that person in the family younger than him, compared to somebody who is very old and he dies, so it is expected that he would die. Somebody in 80s or 90s is dying.
Yes.
Compared to that, if somebody in the middle of his life, suddenly all of a sudden dies. So, and you already explained that the sorrow that comes on the person is nothing wrong in it. Say for example, if we spend some time in thinking on 16th August 1886, when Thakur passed away, all the disciples, around, they were not very sorrowful. Were they not? There was a gloom, and then I think they were very grieved. Is it not?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, they were very grieved. In fact, Holy Mother, when she got word, she ran upstairs in the Kashipur garden house. She ran up the stairs from her room down on the ground floor up to Thakur's room and fell and grabbed his feet and said, "Oh, Ma Kali, where have you gone? Ma Kali, where have you gone?" Wept and wept and wept. So that is natural. But for Holy Mother, it wasn't because she was feeling sorry for Thakur. Because now the one that I loved, the one who guided me, the one who taught me, the one who was my protector, The one who is my guru, my teacher, my husband, my everything, he is gone. What will I do now? So it wasn't grieving for Sri Ramakrishna. It was recognizing that how am I going to live now that he
Right.
is gone? And
Right.
so when Sri Ramakrishna saw his nephew Akkoy, his nephew, passed away. I think Akkoy was Ram Kumar's son, his eldest brother's son. He died quite young, and Sri Ramakrishna was at his bedside when he died. And Sri Ramakrishna saw his soul leave, and so leaving the body. And so Sri Ramakrishna began to dance and sing in joy, seeing that Akkoy's soul was being liberated from the body.
Sure.
But then he went back to his room and realized, where is my Akkoy? Now who am I going to talk to? My nephew whom I love so much. He was such a comfort to me. And then for 2 days, Sri Ramakrishna wept.
Oh,
That,
okay.
that is natural.
That is natural. Yes.
Yes.
So one last thing I wanted to ask you.
Yes.
You talked about Madhusudhan Saraswati's commentary, that
Yes.
you are holding, and you said that that's a little bit of a higher, people, those who are little spiritually advanced, But the book that you are reading, is it in English, translated in English already, or you are translating as you are reading from Sanskrit?
No, the Gita, I'm translating the Gita shlokas myself, but then I go to this book,
Book.
and after analyzing the verse myself, then I go back and read what it has translated the verse. And so that's the part that sometimes I'm not satisfied, not because it's not good, but because it's a little more complicated. So it's not
Yes.
that the others are less spiritual. It's that
Right.
this one he goes into philosophical intricacies, whereas
Sure.
others like Swami Vireshwaranji, who translated Sridhar's commentary, which is a
Oh,
wonderful commentary but very simple, or Tapasyanandaji, they just gave the simple, straightforward meaning.
okay.
And so that's why, though I use this for our class, the Madhusudana for our class here in Houston, and I've been using it for Austin also, I rarely go to the commentary itself.
Sure.
I study it beforehand, but I don't use commentary in the teaching. So
Okay. Thank you. Thank you,
okay,
Mark.
okay.
Thank
Any other question? We can maybe take one more if there's one more question.
Yeah, Rajendra, you go ahead. You had one question, right?
Good morning, Swami.
Yes, Rajan.
I was surprised to hear your statement that Ramakrishna, though talked about devotion, the underlying current was Gnana Yoga. Now, if I understand correctly, Shankaracharya's Gnana Yoga basically uses the world as a mithya. And I do not think that RMK would have agreed to that concept, is that world is mithya. So that is basically antithetical to the argument of Shankaracharya versus RMK. They are contradictory arguments.
Yes. So what I mean by Sri Ramakrishna's teachings being full of knowledge, no, not full of the knowledge in the terms that Shankaracharya taught, but full of knowledge in the sense of full of non-dualism. That Holy Mother said Sri Ramakrishna was an Advaitin. His teachings were all Advaita. That everything he taught was Advaita. And that you see more and more in the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna, that the outward teaching of Sri Ramakrishna is full of devotion, but it's all founded on the knowledge of Advaita.
Self.
So that doesn't mean it's founded on Shankaracharya's philosophy exactly, but even there's not the contradiction between Shankara and Ramakrishna that many people feel there is. Yes, Sri Ramakrishna didn't talk about the unreality of the world usually, though sometimes he did, but usually he didn't. He talked about how everything is the play of the Divine Mother, and as the play of the Divine Mother, it is real. So he was more of his usual teaching was more of Shakti Advaita. That is, that everything is the Divine Mother. There's nothing but the Divine Mother. She is non-dual, but her play is is not to be discounted because it is the Divine Mother's play. So the emphasis was different from Shankaracharya. So you're right, different from Shankaracharya's, but not a complete contradiction of it. And so when I say that it's full of knowledge, I don't mean full of Shankaracharya's philosophy as found in the Brahma Sutra Bhashya or Gita Bhashya, but full of non-dualism.
So is it not closer to Kashmiri Shaivism per se?
Yes, there is a similarity between Sri Ramakrishna's teaching and the Kashmiri Shaiva teaching, just as there is a similarity between Sri Ramakrishna teaching and Shakti Advaita. The Shakta Advaita teaching and the Kashmir Shaiva teaching, which is Advaita also, both of them give value to the world, which Shankara's emphasis in Shankara's teaching is on the denial of reality to the world. But in Shakta Advaita and Kashmiri Shaiva Advaita, they see the world as a real manifestation of the glory of Shiva. But even there, the way we see the world is unreal. The world is real if you see it as the play of the Divine Mother and the play of Shiva, because it is Shiva and the Divine Mother herself. But we see the world without the Shiva or the Divine Mother, and that is unreal.
Thank you.
Okay, so let us close here. And I'm very glad to be with you all. And we'll be here again next Saturday. And let me close with a verse from verse 9 from the Gita Dhyanam, the Gita meditation, traditional Gita meditation. So I'll give it in Sanskrit and then in English before a final namaskar. Om Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudra Marutastun Vandhi Divya Istavaihi Vedai Sangapada Kramopanishadair Gayanti Yam Samagaha Dhyanavasthita Tadgatena Manasa Pashyanti Yam Yogino Yasyandam Navidu Sura Suragana Devayatna Tasmai Namaha, which says, we bow to that supreme being whom Brahma and other gods praise with divine hymns, whose glories the singers of the Sama Vedas sing through the Vedas and Upanishads, whom the yogis see with their minds absorbed in that through meditation, and whose end or beginning neither the gods nor demigods know. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat. Om, peace, peace.